Good evening. Welcome to Financial Fridays, brought to you by Marshall Davis Ministries. I'm your host, Elder Alonzo Hinton. We have a great show for you today. We have Brian White. He's going to continue our discussion on how to finance your post-secondary, post-high school education. But before we get to that, we're going to continue our discussion on biblical principles for financial peace and freedom. But don't forget to go subscribe to MDM TV on YouTube for more of our great content. We have a lot of different content: Financial Fridays, Manna Mondays, and then of course we have our Word Crush Wednesdays and any other content you can view on our MDM TV. All right, so let's go ahead and get to our biblical principles for financial peace. As we talked about last week, God talks about finances a huge amount in the Bible. We talked about how there are 40 verses in baptism, prayer 275 verses, faith 350 verses, and then love 650 verses. But finances, there are over 2,300 verses that talk about finances, material possessions, or wealth. And because God talks about it so much, we have to realize that it's important that we understand how God feels about finances. So that's why it's so many verses in it. And that's one of the reasons we have Financial Friday, to promote your financial health and to show you the biblical financial principles that will bring prosperity to your life. And then it's always important to remember, it's just not about following the principles. It's also about a relationship with God, because God just doesn't want you. While he wants you to have finances, while he wants you to be healthy, while he wants you to have joy and peace, his primary reason for creating you is to have a relationship with you. So let's not just try to skip the finances to get money. We know that's important. Money is important. Money answers all things, but we also have to have that relationship with God. So let's go right ahead. We talked about the definition of financial freedom, and we use an example of building your life on God's financial principles, so you can completely trust God to guide you and provide for you all the days of your life. So that's why we want to have a definition of financial freedom, and we want to understand the financial principles. So then we kind of broke it down into two separate categories: man's way of thinking and then God's way of thinking. Because the way man operates in his financial system, the world system, is completely different from how God operates. So it's important that we understand how man operates and how God operates, so we can see it's a difference. So we talked about a few things last week. You can go back and review it on MDM TV if you like. And today we have a few more principles we're going to talk about. The first one: man's way is to spend all he has. Proverbs 21:20 says that the wise man saves for the future, but the foolish man spends whatever he gets. I think on the screen. Yeah, the wise man spends for the future, but the foolish man spends whatever he gets. All right. So then in God's way, it says we save for the future. Proverbs 23:22-3 says a prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. So you see the difference there. The wise man doesn't worry about the future. He doesn't worry about tomorrow. He doesn't worry about his children and his grandchildren and providing a financial heritage for them. That's all about whatever he can spend today, whatever he can get today. He doesn't look at what's going on in the system now and say, how can I take advantage of it? He just spends money like he has no tomorrow. The second one we talk about, man's way is to envy others. Psalm 73:2-28. It's kind of broken down to those different verses. My feet were slipping, for I was envious of the prosperity of the proud and wicked, and all the time their riches multiply. Now, this is a tough one right here, because I think this is one of the main reasons why we fall into financial pitfalls, because we always looking at other people. We always looking at what they have. We always comparing it to what we have, and it creates jealousy, or like the word says, envy within us, because we want to have it. But God's word says, be content. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So if we keep God as our source, God as our focus, we won't be envious of others. One thing I noticed, and my wife had to teach me this years ago. She said, you don't have to be jealous because they don't make one of anything. So they don't make one Mercedes Benz. They don't make one 3,000 square foot house. They don't make one whatever type of shoe you have. You can get what anybody else has. So jealousy is emotion that causes us to focus on other people rather than focusing on a plan on how to achieve whatever goals we want to have in life. So we more focus on people than we actually are focused on achieving our personal goals. The next one we want to talk about is along the same way. Man's way is to keep up with his neighbors. Exodus 20:17 says, do not covet your neighbor's house or anything else your neighbor owns. I'm going to read that again. Do not covet your neighbor's house or anything else your neighbor owns. So once again, it gets into looking at other people and seeing what they have and saying, I want that. But a lot of times we don't understand the process that they had to go through to achieve or to gain that goal, to get that big car, to get that nice house. So we don't understand what the cost is. So we get ourselves in a situation a lot of times where we overextend ourselves looking at other people. God's way is to experience God's creative care. God will provide for you. You don't have to worry about what anybody else is doing. God is our sustainer and our provider. Ecclesiastes 2:26 says, to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. So a lot of times we're looking at other people worrying about what they have. And God says, look, if you trust me, you trust me and you follow my financial principles, I'll make sure that you are taken care of. And I know personally for me, I've seen this principle in my life over and over and over, where I thought I had to compromise my principles, but I stood on the word of God and I follow his principles, and he has always taken care of me. The next one we're going to talk about, man's way is to argue about money, and God's way is to agree in prayer. 1 Peter 3:7 says, husbands, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect so that nothing will hinder your prayers. I believe so much with all my heart that it's so important that we understand the power of agreement in our prayers as men with our wives. Because a lot of times I believe, and I've seen this in my life once again, that I'm so made in the image and likeness of God that I'm ready to jump off a cliff on whatever his word says. I'm just ready to leap at it. And my wife provides that balance in my life to say, hey, I'm not saying that you shouldn't obey God's instructions, but you might want to consider this factor right here. And a lot of times as heads, we think that means that we don't have to take anybody else's opinions into consideration. No, that's not what that means. What that means is that you're responsible for whatever the outcome is. That's what that means. So you might have to consider another opinion. God's way, once again, agreeing in prayer. The trouble is that your sins have cut you off from God. A lot of times we can't get along or we can't hear from God clearly because it's unconfessed sin that we have not turned to God and say, hey, I'm responsible for this. I know your word says so. For instance, God says to owe no man anything but to love him, right? The word of God says to pay your debt. So for me, I've found that if I owe somebody some money, number one, the first thing I have to do is pay that debt. If I don't pay that debt, I go before God and say, you know what, God, I messed up. I took these people money. I took these people credit and I did not pay it back. I repent before you for not doing that, for not following your word, for not being a good steward. Because what it was, if we don't pay back people who we owe, we're not being a good steward. We're not being responsible. So we have to make sure that we get that sin of not being responsible off our life so God can give us a plan. And then Romans 10:13 says, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And then man's ways, get rich quick schemes and gambling. Proverbs 22:26, the Message version says, don't gamble on a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, hocking your house against a lucky chance. And then First Timothy 6:9 says, people who long to be rich soon begin to do all kinds of wrong things to get money, things that hurt them. We've seen people over and over. They're so obsessed with getting rich that they'll literally do anything. They'll literally risk anything if it costs them everything just to get rich. God's way is steady plodding and hard work. Proverbs 13:11. Wealth from gambling quickly disappears. Wealth from hard work grows. That is a investment principle that if you continue to give the same time, the same amount over time, over and over for years, your investment will continue to grow. So the next one we're going to go to is, that's it. So that's all the principles we have for today. Make sure that if you have any questions, you reach out to me in the comments. I will get back to you as quickly as possible. Now we're going to move on to our guest, Brian White, and he's going to give us some tips on loans for our post-high school secondary education. Brian, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. How are you?
How are you doing today, sir?
Doing well. How are you today?
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. Before we start talking about the loans, why don't you tell us a little about your background and how you got into this career?
Okay, so I work for the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, and we're the state's financial aid agency. But before that, even taking it way back, I was a first generation college student,
Okay.
born and raised in the south side of Chicago, went to Morgan Park High School,
Wow.
found my way going to college, and I'm also the youngest of five boys. So
Okay.
definitely all those experiences kind of helped me into this field, and helped me want to give back to the communities that I grew up in, as well as give students that think that they don't have that chance to actually push them to let them know that they do. So
So
that's how
let
I
me,
got into this line of work.
okay. So let me ask you a question before you move on. So you said you are the first college graduate in your family?
Yes,
Okay.
of my all of my brothers, yeah,
Oh,
and I'm the
fantastic.
youngest.
So did you always want to go to college? Was that always a dream of yours?
I don't think I wouldn't say that it was a dream, but for me, it felt like it was something that I had to do. It
Okay.
was like a calling, just that I had to do it. And when I got there, of course, it was a little rough. It was my first time there. I didn't really have the systems to fall back on.
Okay.
But eventually, I worked my way through it. I found those help that resources in college, and I was able to push through, graduate early. So
Wow.
it didn't start out as something that I felt like I wanted to do. It was just more so something that I had to do for myself.
Okay. So we're going to talk about loans today. When you were trying to figure out if you wanted to go to college, were you ever discouraged because you were like, how am I going to pay for this? Or you were always confident that you would have the funds to pay for college?
So definitely, as a first generation college student, and a low income family, definitely was very scared of loans. The first thing that I heard about loans was that it's just bad. You're going to be in debt. But
Right.
once I kind of got a grip of what it is, and once I was on my way to college, I started to realize that it's not that bad. And now, even in the profession that I'm in now, I learned what loans actually are, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But definitely was scared going to school and not knowing too much about loans.
Okay. So give us an example of what you would say to a student like yourself who really has a dream to go to
Mhm.
college, but at the same time, they're a little afraid to take out a loan.
Okay, so I would tell that student that loans are a source of financial aid. I know that the debt is scary. To think about debt or owing someone is scary. But again, loans are a source of financial aid, and it does help to bridge that gap of what you can afford to go to school. So
Okay.
it's not something that should be looked down on. Definitely should be looked upon, because it does help you. So that's what I would tell that student.
Okay. Fantastic. So, so I guess my next question is, what are the pros and cons of getting the loans for college? I know the positive is you'll be able to pay for college, you'll be able to pay for books. What about the negative side? What's the cons for getting a loan?
So there are negative sides, especially if you do take out private loans. When you do go to school, there are U.S. loans that are from the federal government that you can't take out. Those are going to be different from your private loans. So some of the cons with taking out private loans is that they are going to have higher interest rates, meaning you're going to have to pay back more money in the long run. You also probably won't have uh, grace periods. So if you do take out a private loan, you're going to have to pay that money back as soon as possible versus you taking it out from federal government. You do get grace periods for the federal government loans. So that's something to think about. Other cons that I can think of, there's going to be, besides interest rates, sometimes there might be added fees, penalties if you're not paying your loans on time. Other financial goals that you might have, those can be put on hold, especially once you're graduating from college and you have to start paying back those loans. You might want a nice car or something, but you still have to pay back those loans, and that's going to be important. That does affect your credit score as well. So that's something to always keep in mind. That
Hmm.
can also be a pro in the same sense that it's helping your credit if you are paying back those loans. You're on time with everything. That's helping your credit. That's boosting you up and
Right.
preparing you better for the future versus you not paying it and it becoming a con where you have to get those extra fees. They also can garnish your wages too. So they can start taking from your paychecks if you're not paying back for those loans. So those are the most extreme cons for that, but there are a lot of pros out there as well.
So you mentioned public and private loans. So what's the
Mhm.
difference between the public and private loans, and why, since private loans have to, it might not be a grace period, all these different things. Why would I get a private loan as opposed to a public loan or a loan from the federal government?
Okay, so before I get into that, just to explain and tell everyone what a grace period is, that's just a period that you're allowed to not have to pay back the loan for a certain amount of time. And going back into the private versus the public loans, some private loans, they're usually going to come from banks or institutions. And for those, you won't get those grace periods. You probably will get maybe 60 days or so, but after that, you have to start paying back something. In most cases, they're going to be taking out a little bit from you to have to keep that loan up. For the public loans, when it comes to that, there's a thing called subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So
Mhm.
subsidized are need-based loans. Those loans you do not have to pay the interest on while you're in school at least half time. For the unsubsidized loans, the interest is always accruing on them. But if you are available, you can just pay the interest on them while you're in school. But that's those two are going to make up the loan amount for the federal government in which they can give you. And again, those are public, so they will have that grace period. Their grace periods are usually 6 months. So after you graduate college, you have 6 months to have to pay back those loans. And the idea behind that is that in those 6 months, they expect you to kind of find a job or in your career or to either go back into school. And if you go back into school, your loans go back into um, pretty much that grace period again where you don't have to pay any interest on it.
Okay.
So that's one big benefit of taking out those public loans versus the private.
Okay. Fantastic. So when you talk with a student about financial aid funding, do you generally try to have them see what they can get in grants and scholarships first, or and then talk about loans, or do you talk about it all in one subject?
In most cases, I try to bring them all up, but obviously, if you are available to get those grants and scholarships, then go right ahead. One thing that a lot of people don't know about loans when they see it on their like award letter from an institution is that you don't have to accept those loans. So if you do get more grants and you can find more scholarships, that can replace that loan in which you don't have to pay money back. So that's always going to be the better option when you don't have to owe someone money. So if you can find those grants, you can find those scholarships. They're always out there, especially with the scholarships. I always tell students, even the small scholarships, those add up. So if you have a scholarship that's $100, it might not seem like it's a lot, but that's still $100 going towards your education.
Right.
And you can do a couple of those, and those will start adding up. So that's always going to be better than you taking out loans if that's an option for you. On the other side, if you do have to take out loans, you can always take out less loans by getting those scholarships, getting those grants. So there's always a way to kind of mix and match the money to make it work for you.
So because of what you do, I'm sure you talk to a bunch of different students, different type of students. So what type of opportunities are out there for people who don't have a 4.0 grade point average, aren't at the top of their class, they aren't great athletes, they don't play a instrument? What type of opportunities are out there financially for them to go to college?
So yeah, going back into those scholarships, there's literally scholarships out there for anything. There's scholarships out there for people that are left-handed, people that are right-handed. If you have a certain hobby that you might like or something that you are interested in, there's always scholarships out there. There's also scholarships where you can write an essay telling about yourself. Those are going to be some of those smaller scholarships, but that money is always going to be out there. Same with the loans. I bring that up because no matter what your grades are, no matter what sports you play, those loans are always going to be there, and they're going to be offered to every single student. So that's going to be different ways of which that student can pay for school.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna kind of throw a curveball at you a little bit. Tell us something about loans that is not generally known. A lot of us think we've been through school, or we look on the internet and different places like that for information about getting a loan for school. What can you tell somebody that's not general knowledge about getting a loan for school?
I'll start with what we actually call loans for ISAC, or the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. So there's two types of financial aid. The first one is gift aid, and the second is self-help aid. Gift aid is going to be sort of like your grants and scholarships that we talked about already. That's money that's given to you. And self-help aid is going to be your loans, federal work study. So loans are another word for loans are self-help aid because you're helping yourself with those loans.
Okay.
And they're just, I don't know, they're just out there for you. I can't really think of anything that's too spectacular that people don't know about loans.
Okay.
But again, the one thing that I will say is that it is out there to help you. It is there for you. And even though it seems scary, loans are that source of financial aid that kind of bridges that gap.
Okay. So if you're sitting down with a student and they are talking about taking out loans as part of funding their college, and you see a certain career choice that might be prohibitive to them paying off loans, I don't know how does that conversation go?
So if we are discussing just like their interest in, you say their interest, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So if we're discussing their interests, and then we're looking at loans, we're looking at everything that's all on the table. So usually if they're looking at schools, they're looking at the pathways in which it will take them to get there. So there's always alternatives for that that we would usually bring up. We would usually talk about, just for example, if you don't want to take out those loans, or if that's keeping you from getting to that school, then
Okay.
I would usually recommend a student starting off at a community college. That's going to be always cheaper. They won't have to take out those loans as much. They might even get money back. So that's one way to kind of save money and to kind of hold those loans off for a couple of years. Usually your community college is going to be 2 years. So you're going to have all those main courses already taken care of. And in some cases, once you transfer from the community colleges, you could either be a junior already, just off based off the credits that you have already, and that's going to make you graduate earlier. So you're also going to be saving money there as well.
Yeah, right. Okay.
There's always pathways out there, and there's ways around financial aid to kind of help you not have to pay back so much money at the end of it.
Okay. Fantastic. So at what grade do you start talking to students about funding for college or funding for post-secondary education? Do you wait till they're a junior or a senior, or is that something that starts earlier? What's the process for this?
So for us at ISAC, we talk to freshmen in high school all the way up to college students, adult learners. There are some programs that do speak to kids in the younger grades. So Gear Up specialists, Gear Up programs, they usually talk to the schools with like middle schoolers, first through eighth. But usually for us, it starts that freshman year of high school. Personally, I believe that it should be addressed earlier.
Mhm.
It should just be a part of the curriculum so that people are learning that and they have that financial literacy knowledge beforehand, before they even get to high school, before they get to college. That way they have that choice to make that pathway, make that plan already. And then they won't run into any problems because you already prepared for everything that could come up.
So is this something that is part of every high school, or do you guys have problems like getting the information out there? How would you describe that situation?
For ISAC in general,
Yes.
or yeah, so we're actually all around the state of Illinois.
Mhm.
So each core member has their own district, and we usually service the communities in our district, the high schools, the colleges in our districts. So it's usually easy for us to get the information out. Um, I think the hardest part is when we can't reach certain schools, or the certain schools aren't reaching back to us. That's when it becomes difficult. And of course, we only service Illinois students.
Mhm.
So the other states, there's some times where we do speak to students from other states, but it's very rare. So that's probably the one hindrance or thing that hinders us, is if we were more than just for Illinois, we were able to kind of spread that out more, um, kind of make the core bigger, and kind of talk more to students throughout each state. That would probably help a little bit and kind of spread the word more.
So what will prevent a school from getting giving out the information that you guys give to them, or reaching back to you guys to say, hey, we want to make sure our children, the students in our school, get this information?
Personally, I think sometimes it's busy. Most of the schools that I work with are Chicago public schools, some charter schools. So most of the time, the people that we are reaching out to, they are busy. They do have a lot on their caseload.
Mhm.
So that is one potential problem. And as well as COVID, everything been virtual. That just makes everything a little frustrating sometimes. So those are probably the biggest problems in how we're not able to kind of reach them. I don't think it's anything like personal, or they're intentionally not trying to reach out to us. I think it's just the busy workload just keeps it from happening.
So if we have a student, a freshman, sophomore in college who's watching this right now, and they say this information is new, how can they reach you?
So they can reach me by
How
either going to,
can they reach ISAC?
okay, so yeah, ISAC, you can go to ISAC.student portal, and
Mhm.
on our student portal, we have a bunch of tools for all students to use. They're all going to be free. At the bottom of that page, there's going to be a find your core member. So you can actually go to that, find your core member, type in your zip code. It'll pull up the core member that's in your district, and they'll have their contact information all available for you to reach out to them.
Fantastic. That's great information. Do you have any other information that we didn't get to, Brian? Do you want to share with us?
Yes. So there is one thing that I want to mention. Just kind of deals with loans, just for the high school seniors that may be watching. When you are applying for schools and you do see that you have a Parent Plus loan on your award letter. That's something that is going to be credit based, and that's going to be based off of your parents' credit. That's also going to have a higher interest rate for you. The one thing that I will say is that parents also watching, you do not have to take out that loan because in most cases it will be $20,000 that you're going to be taking out, and that's a pretty big loan that you shouldn't have to take out. A lot of the award letters will just have it there, and it will make it look like you have all of the aid covered. But in most cases, it will be just covering up that that's a loan. So that's something to look out for. And again, remembering that you don't have to accept loans is going to be very important.
Okay, fantastic. I asked all our guests here on Financial Friday this last question in one variation or another. So if you had $1 million to spend, how would you spend it? Whether you spent it personally or whether you would spend it on helping students out, how would you spend it?
To be honest, the first thing that I probably would do is actually pay off my student loans.
Nope.
That's something that I've been working on the last 3 years. So that would be the first thing that I would do. After that, I would probably buy my mom a home. I'm really big into cars, so that's something that I would
Okay.
kind of get into. And then just giving back to underserved communities. I think that they need that financial literacy, like we talked about before.
Right.
Putting that into the schools, I think using that money for that would definitely be helpful, especially for the low income communities, first generation students that need that help, especially learning financial literacy. So I think that putting money back into that would be very beneficial.
So you mentioned financial literacy 3 times. So
Mhm.
does ISAC do anything that helps students with financial literacy? Does ISAC have a financial literacy program, or do they just deal strictly with funding for post-secondary education?
So part of our job as core members, we also do peer mentoring. So we do work one-on-one with students. In terms of the financial literacy, the tools that are going to be on that student portal, we do have budgeting tools on there for students to use to help them out with that. There's also going to be work and jobs on there as well, and career surveys that students can use. And again, all those tools are free.
Okay, cool, fantastic. So it's a lot of information on that ISAC website. I said
Yeah,
that
and
last.
that's going to be ISAC student portal.
Yep, I said my last question 2 questions ago, but I keep coming up. Stuff keeps popping up in my head, so forgive me. So
No
you said,
problem. Keep them coming.
yes, sir. So you said you've been trying to pay your student loans off for the last 3 years. Do you have any
Mhm.
regrets about taking out loans?
I personally do not have any regrets. I actually did a presentation last night where I brought up this too, but I was able to actually go to Cuba while I was in college, and I had to take out an additional loan for that. So loans again are worth it, depending on your experience. And I feel like if if it wasn't for that loan, I wouldn't have been able to travel to Cuba uh, and go there to that beautiful country. Same with me graduating from college. Without the loans, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So I definitely don't regret it.
Okay, fantastic. Great information. Thank you, Brian. Do we have any questions for Brian?
I see one from Sean Davis.
Okay. So Jemiah Mai said, is there a way we can just pay down the principal, or must we go through the process of paying off the interest, then the principal?
Okay, so in most cases, well, technically, right now, due to COVID, there is no interest that's accruing. So if you were to be paying now, if you're already a college student that graduated and you do have loans, right now there's no interest that will be accruing. So you will be paying just the principal.
Okay.
But if you are going to college now for the first time, by the time you're out, hopefully COVID will be over, the pandemic will be over. I would assume that things will be back to normal. So, like I talked about earlier with the unsubsidized loans, where the interest is accruing while you're in school, that interest will be there once you graduate unless you're paying it off. If you're not paying it off while you're in school, then that interest will be there. So every time that you do pay, it's going to attack that interest first, and then it's going to go to the principal after.
Just like any other loan. Yep. Okay. All right. Any other questions we have? Brian, you've been great today. Is any other thing, any other information you think you can share with us?
Yeah, you can just, if with anything, if you want to ask anything about my experience, I did go to a private college.
So
I know that.
So we know automatically if you say private colleges expensive. Private colleges are not cheap.
Mhm.
So go
And
ahead.
that's exactly what my point that I was going to go into. So usually when you're looking at schools, you obviously have your community colleges, you have your trade schools, vocational schools, but then you have your public and your private universities or colleges. In most cases, private schools will be more expensive. But one thing that I will say is that sometimes private schools, they will add more money to you or give you more money for coming to the school.
Yes.
So in my case, I was offered a grant for $15,000 each year just from being from Chicago.
Wow.
So
what school did you go to graduate from?
I went to Knox College
Oh.
out in Galesburg, Illinois. I played basketball there for a couple of years. I was a big part of the community there as well.
Did you
So
play
it was
Morgan Park?
No, I did not play at Morgan Park. I wish I did.
My producer went to Morgan Park, so he's a big Morgan Park fan. I was about to ask him, did he know you? But you said you didn't hoop there. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't. I knew all the coaches and everything and all the players, but just then it just wasn't for me.
It wasn't.
But yeah, it came after. Once I got to college, I realized that was something that I enjoyed doing, and I still do it to this day, just for fun, just to play.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
fantastic,
yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. You've been a great guest. Thank you for joining Financial Fridays. Thank you for providing us.
Thank you for having me.
Great information on loans. If you come up with some new information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You have my contact information. Thank you so much once again. So thank you
for having me.
Thank you for joining Financial Fridays on this Friday. Don't forget, if you need to reach out to me personally, you can reach me at Alonzo Hinton at misifinancialliteracy.org. And once again, don't forget to subscribe to MDM TV if you like to review any of our content that we have. If you want to review this information today or any of our other past content on this Sunday, don't forget on Facebook Live to look at Marshall Davis Ministries, Chicagoland Christian Center, live Facebook broadcast. And then on Monday at 7 p.m., we'll have a broadcast with Manna Monday with our own Pastor Sean Davis, who is also my producer extraordinaire. For him and for Marshall Davis Ministries, thank you for joining us on Financial Fridays. And don't forget that the best is yet to come.